Sometimes I wonder if the universe has a sense of humor, and if so, whether it enjoys making fools out of supposedly intelligent species. My name is Elder Krix Stoneheart, Senior Council Member of the Zenith Collective, and I've spent the last 200 cycles believing that our civilization represented the pinnacle of rational decision-making. Turns out, one human female was about to prove that our collective intelligence was roughly equivalent to a broken hyperdrive. The problem started when Captain Juno Rivers crashed her transport vessel on our homeworld of New Sanctuary. Standard procedure dictated immediate quarantine, medical evaluation, and eventual deportation back to human space. What we hadn't anticipated was that Captain Rivers would somehow manage to violate every social protocol we held sacred within 48 hours of regaining consciousness. Elder Stoneheart, Council Secretary Vel Swiftclaw reported during our emergency session, the human has been observed engaging in unauthorized interactions with our youth population. She's teaching them what she calls games. Games. The very word made my scales itch with disapproval. What kind of games? I asked, though I suspected I wouldn't like the answer. Physical activities involving coordinated movement, competitive elements, and… Vel paused, consulting her notes with obvious distress. Laughter. Excessive amounts of laughter. Excessive laughter. In a society that prized contemplative silence and measured discourse, excessive laughter was practically a criminal offense. Furthermore, Council Member Tarn Ironwill interjected with his usual disdain for anything that disrupted our perfectly ordered existence. The human has been observed sharing food with our lower caste workers. She claims they looked hungry. They looked hungry. Our entire social structure was based on carefully maintained hierarchies, and this human was undermining it with sandwiches. And most disturbing of all, Council Member Zira Coldmind added with barely contained horror, she's been asking questions about our governance systems. Specifically, she wants to know why we don't allow our youth to participate in decision-making processes. Why we don't allow youth participation. The audacity was breathtaking. I stood before the assembled council, my ceremonial robes rustling with the weight of 2 centuries of accumulated wisdom. Council members, it appears we have a classic case of human contamination. The aliens' primitive social concepts are already spreading through our population. What do you recommend, Elder Stoneheart? Asked Council Member Finn Brightscale, the youngest member of our assembly at a mere 150 cycles. Immediate exile. I declared with the authority that had served me well throughout my career. The human will be transported to the nearest uninhabited system and left to contemplate the consequences of her cultural disruption. The vote was unanimous, as our votes always were. After all, we were the Zenith Collective, COS. We had achieved social perfection through careful elimination of chaos, unpredictability, and individual expression. One disruptive human female wasn't going to change that. What we hadn't accounted for was the reaction of our own citizens. Elder Stoneheart, Security Chief Rex Ironjaw announced the next morning, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of confusion. We have a situation developing in the Central Plaza. A situation. In 200 cycles, we'd never had situations in the Central Plaza. What kind of situation? Approximately 300 of our citizens have gathered to protest the human's exile. They're displaying signs, chanting slogans, and… He paused, as if struggling to process what he was reporting. They're singing. Singing. Public displays of emotion were strictly regulated, and singing fell firmly into the category of unnecessary noise pollution. Who organized this protest? That's the strange part, sir. It appears to be entirely spontaneous. The participants range from young adults to senior citizens, crossing all caste boundaries. They claim the human taught them about something called civil disobedience. Civil disobedience. Of course she had. Humans had a talent for exporting their dysfunction to other species. I made my way to the Central Plaza, expecting to find a small group of malcontents who could be easily dispersed with a stern lecture about social responsibility. What I found instead was the largest gathering of Zenith citizens in our recorded history, all of them displaying an alarming degree of enthusiasm. At the center of the crowd stood Captain Juno Rivers herself, a tall human female with unruly red hair and the kind of bright green eyes that suggested she found the entire situation amusing rather than serious. She was surrounded by a group of our youngest citizens, who were hanging on her every word with disgusting devotion. "Citizens of New Sanctuary," I announced through the plaza's communication system, "you will disperse immediately and return to your assigned duties. This gathering violates municipal codes 47, 62, and 143. The crowd turned to face me, and I was shocked to see not fear or shame in their expressions, but something far more disturbing: defiance. Elder Stoneheart, called out Luna Quickstep, a mid-level administrator whose family had served the council faithfully for 3 generations. "We request a formal review of the Exile decision. Captain Rivers has committed no crimes against our people." Committed no crimes. Apparently, social disruption no longer qualified as criminal behavior. "Luna Quickstep," I replied with the patient tone I reserved for particularly dense subordinates. "The human has violated numerous cultural protocols. She has undermined our social order and introduced dangerous concepts to our youth population." "What dangerous concepts?" asked Orion Starbright, one of our most promising young engineers. "Teaching us that work should be balanced with recreation, showing us that different castes can interact as equals, demonstrating that questions about authority are not acts of treason." Questions about authority. The very foundation of our civilization was crumbling before my eyes. "Citizens," I said, raising my voice to address the entire crowd, "you have been contaminated by human ideologies that have no place in our society. The Exile decision is final and will be implemented immediately." That was when Captain Rivers stepped forward, and I got my first close look at the creature who had somehow managed to turn our perfectly ordered world upside down in less than 3 days. "Elder Stoneheart," she said with a voice that carried easily across the plaza without any electronic amplification, "I'd like to propose an alternative to Exile." An alternative to Exile. The human wanted to negotiate. "Captain Rivers, you are in no position to propose anything. You are a criminal awaiting deportation." She smiled, and I realized that human facial expressions were far more unsettling in person than they appeared in our xenobiology textbooks. "What if your people could choose for themselves whether I stay or go?" Choose for themselves. The concept was so alien to our governing philosophy that I needed several moments to process it. "Captain Rivers, our citizens do not make decisions about matters of planetary security. That responsibility belongs to the Council." "Why?" she asked simply. "Why?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I could see it spreading through the crowd with visible effect. Suddenly, 300 Zenith citizens were looking at me expectantly, waiting for an explanation that had never been required before. "Because," I said with all the authority I could muster, "the Council possesses the wisdom and experience necessary to make complex decisions. Our citizens lack the proper training and perspective." "Based on what? Evidence?" Captain Rivers continued her interrogation with the persistence of a particularly annoying parasite. "Based on what evidence?" She wanted evidence for the fundamental principles of our society. "Based on 2,000 cycles of successful governance," I replied, though I was beginning to feel like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "Successful according to whom?" she pressed. "The Council? Or the people you govern?" "The people we govern." As if their opinions mattered in questions of governance. "Captain Rivers," Councilmember Ironwill interjected, having arrived with the rest of the emergency assembly, "you clearly do not understand the complexity of maintaining social order. Individual desires must be subordinated to collective needs. Individual desires like wanting to laugh with friends, like asking questions about how decisions are made, like believing that everyone deserves to be treated with basic respect, regardless of their caste. Basic respect, regardless of caste." The human was attacking the very concept of social hierarchy. "Those desires," Councilmember Coldmind declared with her usual precision, "lead to chaos, conflict, and the breakdown of established order." Captain Rivers looked around at the peaceful crowd of citizens who had gathered to protest her exile. "Does this look like chaos to you? Does this look like chaos?" I had to admit that despite violating numerous protocols, The gathering was remarkably orderly. Furthermore, she continued with growing confidence, has anyone asked these people if they want to maintain your established order? Or do you just assume they're happy with it? Assume they're happy. The question struck at something I had never considered in 2 centuries of governance. Of course they're happy, I said automatically. We have eliminated poverty, crime, and social unrest. You've eliminated poverty by declaring that lower castes don't deserve resources. You've eliminated crime by making it illegal to question authority. And you've eliminated social unrest by forbidding any form of emotional expression, making it illegal to question authority. When she phrased it that way, our achievements sounded less impressive. Captain Rivers, I said, attempting to regain control of the conversation. You have been on our world for 3 days. What could you possibly understand about our society that we do not? I understand that your people are curious, creative, and capable of thinking for themselves when given the opportunity. I understand that they want to participate in decisions that affect their lives. And I understand that they're tired of being told that their thoughts and feelings don't matter. Their thoughts and feelings don't matter. No one had ever phrased our governance philosophy quite so bluntly. Moreover, she continued, gesturing toward the crowd, I understand that they're willing to risk punishment to stand up for what they believe is right. That takes courage. Courage. I looked at the assembled citizens with new eyes, seeing not obedient subjects but individuals who had made a conscious choice to challenge authority. Elder Stoneheart, Luna Quickstep called out again. We formally request a public vote on Captain Rivers' exile. If the majority supports the Council's decision, we will accept it without further protest. Public vote. The very concept was revolutionary. Absolutely not, Councilmember Ironwill declared. Governance by popular opinion is the path to mob rule and social collapse. How do you know? Captain Rivers asked. Have you ever tried it? Have you ever tried it? The simple question exposed the fundamental flaw in our certainty. We have studied the history of failed civilizations, Councilmember Coldmind replied with academic precision. Democratic systems invariably lead to chaos and decline. Which civilizations? Captain Rivers pressed. Can you name specific examples of societies that failed because they allowed citizens to participate in governance? Specific examples. I realized with growing unease that our historical records focused primarily on our own achievements rather than comparative analysis. The evidence is clear, I said, though I was beginning to suspect it wasn't as clear as I had always believed. Then you won't mind putting it to a test, Captain Rivers suggested with dangerous reasonableness. 1 vote. If your people choose exile, I'll leave peacefully. If they choose to let me stay, you'll consider that maybe your governance model isn't as perfect as you think. 1 vote. Such a simple concept, yet it threatened everything we had built. Captain Rivers, I said slowly, you are proposing to overturn 2,000 cycles of political evolution with a single demonstration of mob opinion. I'm proposing to find out what your people actually want, instead of assuming you know better than they do. Assuming we know better. The phrase highlighted an uncomfortable truth about our governing philosophy. The crowd had grown during our debate, and I noticed with alarm that it now included citizens from every level of our society. Workers, administrators, even some mid-level officials were present, all of them watching the exchange with obvious interest. Elder Stoneheart, Orion Starbright, spoke up again. What are you afraid of? If your system truly represents our best interests, surely we'll vote to maintain it. What are you afraid of? The question cut straight to the heart of my discomfort. We are not afraid, I replied with as much dignity as I could maintain. We are simply responsible for protecting our society from dangerous experiments. Dangerous experiments like letting people have a voice in their own governance? Captain Rivers asked with that infuriating human smile. Letting people have a voice. When had basic participation become a dangerous experiment? Captain Rivers, you fundamentally misunderstand the nature of leadership. Effective governance requires expertise, experience, and the ability to make difficult decisions without being swayed by emotional responses. And you fundamentally misunderstand the nature of people, she replied. They're not children who need to be protected from their own opinions. They're intelligent beings who deserve to participate in shaping their own lives. Deserve to participate. The concept was so alien to our system that I struggled to process its implications. Furthermore, she continued, expertise and experience are valuable, but they're not substitutes for consent. The best leaders are those who serve with the permission of the people they lead. Permission of the people. Government by permission, rather than authority. That's a pleasant sentiment, Council Member Ironwill interrupted, but governance requires making unpopular decisions for the greater good. Public opinion is too easily swayed by emotion and short-term thinking. Then educate them, Captain Rivers said simply. Explain your reasoning. Trust them to understand complex issues when given accurate information. Trust them to understand. We had never trusted our citizens to understand anything. And if they disagree with your decisions after receiving all the information, she continued, maybe they're right and you're wrong. Maybe they're right and you're wrong. The possibility that the council could be incorrect was not something we had seriously considered. The crowd had been listening to this exchange with growing excitement, and I could see the dangerous ideas taking root in their minds. Questions about authority, demands for participation, expectations of respect, N.A. Captain Rivers had introduced a virus of individual thought that was spreading faster than I could contain it. Elder Stoneheart, Luna Quickstep called out once more. We're prepared to hold our own vote if the council refuses to authorize one. We've learned about organizing from Captain Rivers. Organizing. The human had taught them to organize. Citizens, I announced with growing desperation, return to your duties immediately. This gathering is hereby declared illegal under emergency protocols. What emergency? Asked Orion Starbright. A peaceful discussion about governance, citizens expressing their opinions, or just people refusing to obey orders without understanding why? Refusing to obey orders without understanding why. The very foundation of our authority was crumbling. The emergency, Council Member Coldmine declared with icy precision, is the breakdown of social order caused by alien contamination. Alien contamination? Captain Rivers laughed, and the sound carried across the plaza like music. You mean treating people like they matter? Encouraging them to think for themselves? Suggesting that they have a right to participate in decisions that affect their lives? Treating people like they matter? When had basic human dignity become contamination? The crowd was beginning to murmur among themselves, and I could hear fragments of conversation that made my scales crawl with anxiety. Words like choice, rights, and freedom were spreading through the gathering like a plague of independent thought. Captain Rivers, I said with my final attempt at authority, you will submit to immediate exile, or we will be forced to remove you by strength. And you'll remove everyone who supports her too, Luna Quickstep asked with newfound boldness. Because that's going to be most of your population. Most of your population. I looked around the plaza and realized with growing horror that she might be right. Citizens, I called out desperately. You are being manipulated by alien psychology. The human is exploiting your natural curiosity to undermine our stability. Our stability? Orion Starbright replied. Or your control. Our stability, or your control. The distinction I had never considered was suddenly blindingly obvious. That was when Captain Rivers made her most devastating move. She stepped onto the plaza's central platform and addressed the crowd directly. People of New Sanctuary, she said, her voice carrying easily to every corner of the gathering. Your council believes you're incapable of making intelligent decisions about your own lives. They think you need to be protected from your own thoughts and feelings. They assume you'll choose chaos over order if given the chance. Chaos over order. She was turning our greatest strength into our greatest weakness. I think they're wrong, she continued. I think you're smart enough to understand complex issues. I think you're mature enough to handle responsibility. And I think you deserve the chance to prove it. Deserve the chance to prove it. The crowd was hanging on every word. So here's what I propose, she said with that dangerous human confidence. Vote. Choose for yourselves whether you want me to stay or go. Choose whether you want to continue being governed without your consent or start participating in your own government. Choose whether you trust your council's judgment more than your own. Trust your council's judgment more than your own. The ultimate test of our authority. The crowd erupted in discussion, citizens talking animatedly among themselves in a display of public engagement that violated every principle of our ordered society. And as I watched them debate, question, and think for themselves, I realized something that shook me to my core. They looked happy. Absolutely not. Councilmember Ironwill's voice cracked like a whip across the plaza. We will not permit mob rule to contaminate our perfect society. But the crowd was already moving, organizing themselves into discussion groups with the efficiency of a species that had apparently been waiting centuries for someone to ask their opinion. Captain Rivers stood calmly in the center of the storm she had created, watching 300 citizens engage in the first democratic process in our recorded history. Elder Stoneheart, Security Chief Ironjaw, approached with obvious reluctance. My officers are requesting clarification on how to proceed. The crowd is completely peaceful, but they're refusing dispersal orders. Refusing dispersal orders. In 2 centuries, no one had ever refused a direct command from security forces. Arrest them, Councilmember Coldmine declared with her usual ice-cold logic. All of them. Charge them with sedition and public disorder. Ma'am, Security Chief Ironjaw replied carefully. That would require arresting approximately 1/3 of our adult population. Our detention facilities can hold maybe 50 individuals. 1/3 of our adult population. The scale of the rebellion was breathtaking. Then build more detention facilities, Coldmine snapped. Or better yet, exile the troublemakers, along with their human inspiration. That was when Luna Quickstep did something that made my heart stop beating. She climbed onto the platform beside Captain Rivers and addressed the council directly. Council members, she announced with a voice I had never heard her use before. Strong, confident, unafraid. We have completed our preliminary vote. By a margin of 274 to 26, we choose to allow Captain Rivers to remain on New Sanctuary. 274 to 26. The numbers hit me like a physical blow. Furthermore, she continued while I struggled to process this catastrophic rejection of our authority, we formally request the establishment of a citizen assembly to review current governance policies and propose reforms. Citizen assembly. They wanted to reform our government. This is treason, Councilmember Ironwill declared, his composure finally cracking. You are all guilty of sedition against lawful authority. Whose authority? Asked Orion Starbright, stepping forward with newfound courage. Authority we never granted? Authority that was never explained or justified? Authority that demands obedience without offering respect? Authority that demands obedience without offering respect. When had our legitimate governance become tyranny? You granted that authority by accepting the benefits of our civilization, I replied, grasping for familiar ground in this shifting landscape of rebellion. Did we? Luna Quickstep challenged. Or were we simply born into a system we were never allowed to question? Born into a system we were never allowed to question. The distinction was more profound than I wanted to admit. Citizens, I tried one final appeal to reason. You are destroying 2,000 cycles of progress. Without structured hierarchy and clear authority, our society will collapse into warring factions. Will it? Captain Rivers asked quietly. Or will it evolve into something better? Evolve into something better. The possibility that our perfect system could be improved was heretical. Captain Rivers, Councilmember Coldmine said with dangerous precision, you have exactly 1 hour to depart our world voluntarily. After that, we will consider you a hostile invader and respond accordingly. And what about us? Luna Quickstep demanded. Are you going to exile everyone who disagrees with you? Exile everyone who disagrees. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If necessary, Coldmine replied with chilling certainty. Order must be maintained. That was when the impossible happened. The crowd, instead of backing down in fear, began to laugh. Not the cruel laughter of mockery, but the warm laughter of people who had suddenly realized something absurd. "You're going to exile most of your population?" Orion Starbright asked between chuckles. "Who's going to run your perfect society then? Who's going to run your perfect society?" The practical implications of our threat were suddenly obvious. "We will find compliant citizens to replace the troublemakers," Ironwill declared with typical bureaucratic blindness. "Compliant citizens?" Captain Rivers asked with amusement. "You mean people who don't think, don't question, and don't care about their own lives? Good luck building a civilization with those. People who don't think, don't question, and don't care." Our ideal citizens sounded remarkably like zombies when described that way. Furthermore, Luna Quickstep added with growing confidence, "We've been discussing Captain Rivers' alternative proposal. If the Council insists on exile, we're prepared to leave with her." "Leave with her." The words crashed over me like a tsunami of catastrophe. "Leave with her?" I stammered. "Leave to go where?" "Anywhere that values our thoughts and respects our choices," Orion Starbright replied. "Captain Rivers says there are dozens of human colonies that welcome immigrants who want to participate in self-governance. Human colonies that welcome immigrants. Our citizens wanted to become humans. You would abandon your homeworld, your families, your entire civilization for alien concepts of governance?" Council member Coldmind asked with genuine bewilderment. "We would leave behind a system that treats us like children and embrace one that treats us like adults," Luna Quickstep replied with devastating simplicity. "Treats us like adults." When had maturity become a revolutionary concept? Council members. Captain Rivers interjected with that dangerous human reasonableness. "There's still time to avoid this crisis. Hold the vote. Let your people decide for themselves. Trust their judgment. Trust their judgment." The impossible request that challenged everything we believed. "Never," Ironwill declared with absolute finality. "We will not legitimize mob rule with the pretense of democratic participation. Then, we'll legitimize it ourselves," Luna Quickstep announced. "Citizens, we're forming a provisional government based on representative democracy. Anyone who wants to participate is welcome." Provisional government. They were creating their own authority structure. "You cannot form a government," I shouted with desperation. "You lack the expertise, the experience, the wisdom necessary for complex decision-making." "Then we'll learn," Orion Starbright replied with infuriating confidence. "Captain Rivers has offered to teach us about democratic institutions, citizen participation, and accountable leadership." Accountable leadership. Leadership that answered to the people rather than commanding them. "And if you make mistakes?" Council member Coldmind demanded. "If your inexperience leads to poor decisions and social chaos? Then we'll fix our mistakes and learn from them," Luna Quickstep said with the kind of optimism that made my scales crawl. "That's what responsible adults do. Fix our mistakes and learn from them." A completely alien approach to governance. "Citizens, I made one final attempt to salvage our authority. You are being seduced by impossible promises. Democratic governments are inefficient, corrupt, and unstable. They collapse under the weight of competing interests and popular delusions." "Have you ever lived in one?" Captain Rivers asked. "Or are you basing that assessment on theoretical knowledge?" Theoretical knowledge. Our certainty was built on assumptions rather than experience. "We have studied the historical records," Coldmind replied with academic precision. "Whose historical records?" Captain Rivers pressed. "Compiled by whom? With what biases and limitations?" With what biases and limitations? The foundation of our knowledge was suddenly questionable. "Moreover," she continued with growing momentum, "even if some democratic experiments have failed, does that mean all of them will? Should people never be allowed to try governing themselves because some attempts have been unsuccessful? Should people never be allowed to try?" The question struck at the heart of our paternalistic philosophy. "Captain Rivers," I said with my last vestige of authority, "you are systematically destroying a stable civilization, with untested theories and dangerous idealism." "I'm offering people a choice," she replied simply. The choice to participate in their own governance or continue being governed without their consent. The choice to participate. Such a basic concept, yet it threatened everything we had built. And we choose participation, Luna Quickstep declared, speaking for the crowd that had somehow transformed from obedient subjects into active citizens. We choose to form our own government, with Captain Rivers as our advisor and representative. Our own government. The revolution was complete. This is madness, Council Member Ironwill whispered, staring at the crowd as if seeing them for the first time. This is freedom, Orion Starbright corrected. Something we never knew we wanted until someone showed us it was possible. Something we never knew we wanted. Our perfect order had been built on ignorance of alternatives. Captain Rivers, I said quietly, accepting the inevitable. What happens now? Now your people get to decide their own future, she replied with that insufferable human optimism. They'll make mistakes, learn from them, and build something better than what they had before. Build something better. The possibility that our subjects could improve on our perfect system was both terrifying and intriguing. And what about the Council? Council Member Coldmind asked with characteristic bluntness. That's up to them, Captain Rivers said, gesturing toward the crowd. They might choose to keep some elements of your current system. They might decide to start completely fresh. Or they might create something entirely new that combines the best of both approaches. Combines the best of both approaches. A synthesis rather than a replacement. Citizens, I called out with resignation. What do you intend to do with the current government? We intend to invite you to participate, Luna Quickstep replied, shocking me with her generosity. Your experience and knowledge are valuable, even if your methods are outdated. Invite you to participate. They wanted us to join rather than overthrow us. Participate how? I asked suspiciously. As elected representatives, Orion Starbright explained. If the people choose to trust you with their votes, you can continue serving. If they don't, you'll step aside and let others lead. If the people choose to trust you, governance by permission rather than assumption. And if we refuse to participate in this democratic experiment, Council Member Ironwill demanded, then you can maintain your perfect order in exile, Captain Rivers suggested with amusement. I'm sure you'll find some uninhabited planet where you can govern yourselves without having to worry about pesky citizen input. Perfect order in exile. The irony was not lost on me. As I watched our former subjects organize themselves into committees, draft provisional charters, and debate the structure of their new government, I realized something that shook me to my core. They weren't descending into chaos and mob rule as our theories predicted. They were creating something organized, thoughtful, and inclusive. Testure. Elder Stoneheart. Luna Quickstep approached me with an expression I had never seen on a citizen's face before. Respect without fear. Courtesy without subservience. We're holding elections for our provisional assembly next week. Would you consider running for a seat? Consider running for a seat. She was asking me to compete for the authority I had always assumed was mine by right. Why would you want me? I asked, genuinely confused. Because despite everything, you do care about our society. You've made mistakes, but your experience could be valuable if it's tempered by accountability to the people you serve. Accountability to the people you serve. Leadership as service rather than dominance. And if I lose, then you'll have learned something about democracy that no textbook could teach you, she replied with a smile that reminded me uncomfortably of Captain Rivers. 3 months later, I found myself sitting in the new Sanctuary Citizens' Assembly as the elected representative from the Northern District. The people had chosen to keep me, though by a much smaller margin than I was comfortable with. More importantly, they had chosen to keep me on their terms rather than mine. The provisional government had evolved into something I never could have predicted. More efficient than our old system because decisions had popular support. More stable because everyone had a voice in creating the rules. And more effective because leaders knew they would be held accountable for their choices. Elder Stoneheart. Captain Rivers approached after our latest assembly session. How are you adapting to democracy? It's terrifying, I admitted honestly. Every decision requires justification. Every policy faces scrutiny. Every leader must earn their position repeatedly. And? She prompted. And it works better than anything we ever created, I said with reluctant admiration. Our people are happier, more productive, and more engaged than they ever were under our perfect order. More engaged than under our perfect order. The comparison was humbling. They were always capable of this, Captain Rivers said gently. They just needed someone to believe in them and give them the chance to prove it. Someone to believe in them. Such a simple concept that we had never considered. Captain Rivers, I said with genuine curiosity, what made you think our citizens would choose freedom over security? Because, she replied with that characteristic human confidence, given the choice between being safe and being free, most people will choose freedom, even when it's scary, even when it's hard, even when they don't know if they'll succeed. Most people will choose freedom, the fundamental truth we had never tested. And if they had chosen security, then I would have respected their choice and left peacefully, she said simply. Democracy isn't about forcing people to be free. It's about giving them the right to choose their own path. 3. The right to choose their own path. The human gift to our civilization. As I watched Captain Rivers prepare for her departure, her work on New Sanctuary complete, other worlds calling for her expertise in democratic transition, I reflected on how completely one human female had transformed our understanding of governance, leadership, and the nature of civilization itself. She hadn't conquered us with superior technology or overwhelming force. She had simply asked us to trust our own people, and then given them the tools to prove that trust was justified. Captain Rivers, I called as she headed toward her repaired transport. Will we see you again? Probably not, she replied with a smile. You don't need me anymore. You've learned the most important lesson in governance, which is that the best leaders are those who teach others to lead themselves. Teach others to lead themselves. The ultimate act of democratic leadership. As her ship disappeared into the stars, I turned back toward the assembly building, where 300 elected representatives were preparing to debate, argue, and ultimately decide the future of our world through the messy, inefficient, absolutely wonderful process of democracy. Our perfect order was gone forever. In its place, we had something infinitely more valuable, the chaotic, beautiful, utterly human concept of self-governance. And for the first time in 2 centuries, I was excited to see what we would build next.